You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristen and Dilley.
My name is Kristen and Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristen Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
We're joined today by Dr. Kristen Mittelman and Carla Davis of Othram, the hottest DNA lab in the country. Kristen and Carla, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Definitely. Thank you.
We thought it would be really fun to have this conversation, and we have two Kristens, which will make this especially interesting / confusing.
Yeah, we'll be fine.
Before we get into the two of you, Kristen, can you explain a little bit what Othram is and what services you perform?
Othram is an advanced forensic lab purpose-built to identify perpetrators and victims from crime scenes. That's all we do. And so we started back in 2018 with the purpose of trying to figure out how do you bring closure using forensic genetic genealogy to cases that were previously intractable. What do I mean by that? You heard of the Golden State Killer solving, you heard of a few other cases solving here or there, but you never just didn't see every case solving. And obviously a lot of cases have DNA. And so why wasn't this technique able to solve every case that had DNA? The reason is most of the DNA that is found at crime scenes is intractable. That's the first sort of barrier into being able to build one of these DNA profiles and try to identify someone from a crime scene. And so we worked really hard to build methods and figure out how to be able to get information from DNA that was previously intractable. And so after we did that, we decided that we would build everything from beginning to end that you would need in an investigation, from the time that you find evidence in a crime scene all the way to what you need to go to the courtroom in order to prosecute a case where you identified a perpetrator. And so Othram is a one-stop shop. It's a solution all the way from the beginning to the end, or evidence to courtroom, that allows you to be able to solve some of these cases or help solve some of these cases.
How many DNA labs, either in the country or in the world, are capable of doing what you do?
I believe 0.
What makes you say that, though? In other words, there are DNA labs across the country claiming they can do what Othram does. What makes you say you believe that no one else can do what you do?
So at Othram, we have one first principle, and I think we're going to probably talk about it more than once today, and that's to do what's best for the case. The first thing that happens in these types of investigations is that evidence is taken, DNA evidence is taken, and it's consumed. DNA testing is consumable. And so often you consume this evidence without predictability or without being able to in advance know that you're actually going to bring value to this investigation. One of the things that I love about Othram is that since we're singularly focused on this, and since we do everything in-house, we have built these truth sets. We've run more evidence than anyone else on earth using this type of advanced DNA testing method. And we've built these truth sets that we can follow now as a guide. So when we get evidence today at Othram 2022, I would say, we are able to predict in advance, before we consume the evidence, before we consume budgets, because budgets in this field are extremely small as well, and a big issue as far as solving these cases, that we're actually going to be able to build one of these DNA profiles, digitize the evidence forever, and actually bring value to the investigation. To date, we are the only lab that I know of that has that sort of predictability feature. And when we run our assays, when I write grants, and that's my job here at Othram, is to figure out how to get funding for these types of cases, I have not been able to see anyone else offer to only charge if they actually can build a profile. That's one of the reasons. The other reason I believe that Othram is completely different than any other lab on the planet is because Othram was built just for this. And the experts that were brought here from all these different fields were all brought here with a purpose. And I know that it might sound silly, but when something is purpose built, it actually functions better. David, you guys have met David, talked to David on this podcast. He was 15 years old when he helped build the first gene printer. He was part of the first Human Genome Project, the 1,000 Human Genome Project, and he helped build the standards that the FDA uses today. He helped build them in conjunction with NIST in order to make life or death decisions using this type of sequencing in medicine. When we started Othram, we realized that we need to create sort of the roads, the pathways to justice so that people can get on them and follow them, so that more people can start to use the right techniques, the right methods. But right now, those standards aren't created in forensics at all. And so I think every single one of us, whether the scientists worked with cancer cells where you are taking the small amount of something and ignoring the large, right? Cancer cells are a very small portion of your body that a lot in evidence. You have a lot of victim and very little perpetrator. Whether our experts were experts in being able to extract DNA from bones from 200, 300 years ago, ancient DNA bones. It doesn't matter, but every single person here has a background of 20, 25 years in sort of genomics and science that actually applies every single day to the type of evidence that we see here from crime scenes.
Carla, let me switch over to you for a second. Talk to us a little bit about how you got involved with Othram and what your role is.
I'm the chief genetic genealogist at Othram. Our journey started with a donation and a follow-up email. So I had donated to a case that caught my attention. And the next day I received an email asking, did I make a mistake? And I'm like, no, I did not make a mistake. That was the amount that I intended to donate. And it sparked conversation. And I said, look, there's another case that I'm interested in working as well. There's another case that I'm interested in donating to as well. I just completed an unknown parentage case in that area. So if the person is from that area, the work that I have might be helpful to the case. And I would love to come on and work that case if possible. They asked the investigator said yes. And then I got on that case. It ended up being solved. And from there, we decided to work in Mississippi. And I had wanted to clear Mississippi's backlog for all the cases that were in NamUs. I wanted to help to fund those cases so those cases could be solved. And that was the beginning of our journey.
So tell us about the Mississippi connection. Why Mississippi, and why did you want to state that goal as something you were looking to achieve?
I'm originally from Mississippi, so helping my state was very important to me. And when I looked at the list of unidentified remains in the state, I believe there were about 53 at that time. And I felt that was a very workable number that I could help to contribute to and make a difference in that state.
And so how many of those 53 cases have y'all cleared?
I believe we have cleared. One second, let me just look at something.
Uh-oh, she's going to check the computer.
She's going to check numbers.
Do you have that number, Kristin?
We've cleared most of the ones that there was DNA for. So the problem that we're having is finding the evidence for the rest. But when we get it, we clear it. And some have announced and some haven't yet, but it's getting there.
Out of all the cases, I believe 17 have announced, but that is not, maybe they originated in Mississippi, but maybe they were in another area or another place that where the person was from.
Wow, that is amazing.
And then, Carla, how did you get into genealogy? Because there's a whole story there as well.
Yes, there is. I've been a genealogy hobbyist since 2003, researching my maternal family. I grew up not knowing my paternal side. So when DNA testing came about, I took a DNA test. And that my first test was, I believe, in 2012, 2013 with 23andMe. The closest match I had, they were like fourth, fifth cousins. I didn't know what to do with fourth or fifth cousins. So in 2016, I took an ancestry DNA test. I ended up with a third cousin match that I did not recognize and that were not related to my half siblings, which would be my maternal half siblings. So I knew those were from my father's side. So I just started learning everything I could, watching every lecture that was being taught, reading books on the subject, and figured out how to do it myself. And I applied those techniques and I ended up solving my own case. And then I was hooked. It was a complete addiction.
Wow.
And I went from there to solving a mystery of my great-grandfather. He had changed his name, and we are now reunited with his family. And it's just wonderful to have had that connection. DNA brought us all together. They thought that my great-grandfather had died of yellow fever, but he didn't. He had changed his name, moved to a different state, and had all of us. And now we have like reunions, and it's just wonderful to be in contact with those people, family.
That is so cool. Oh my gosh.
Do we know why he changed his name?
Yes, there's a couple of different rumors in the family, but he had a very deep scar on his cheek. And the rumors in the family were that he had changed his name because he had gotten into a brawl with someone and he had accidentally killed him. So he fled the state and went to another state. And yeah, so it makes sense because he does have a deep scar on his cheek, or he did have a deep scar on his cheek. He died in the 1930s, I believe, but he did. Pictures, you can clearly see it.
You couldn't make this stuff up. This is amazing.
No, you didn't make this stuff up.
This is amazing. The author in me is going, that's fantastic. I want to use that.
Yeah,
that's
really.
Amazing. What a great story.
And I almost said a moment ago, Carla, this very interesting path that you took, which leads you to Othram ultimately, has nothing to do with murder. But then you start giving us the backstory, and I'm like, maybe,
wow,
a barroom brawl / manslaughter case.
Carla was solving cases from day one.
Wow, that's amazing. So before we go too terribly much further, let's clear up a little bit of the terminology that we use here. Do you guys prefer calling the field forensic genealogy or investigative genetic genealogy, or are they like interchangeable?
I think we use forensic genetic genealogy. The reason we use that is because that's the term that the DOJ uses as far as funding these programs. And either one, obviously, we would respond to, so don't worry about it too much. We just stay consistent with what we ask for when we go back to the federal government.
I would like to say that forensic genealogy is actually an already established field. It is for heir descendancy, where they do heir research. So we have to say forensic genetic genealogy, just to differentiate.
Oh, that makes sense.
We've actually hoped that the industry, if you will, would settle down and call it one thing, because we find, and Kristen and I we think of ourselves as at the consumer, citizen, average person level.
Yeah.
One of the things we love about doing Mind Over Murder is we get to talk to brilliant people like the two of you and learn all kinds of things. But I will say, as a civilian, I actually think it would be better for the field if we stopped calling this field by multiple names and picked a name and stuck with it. And actually, Kristen Mittelman, you make a really good point. If the Department of Justice is calling this field forensic genetic genealogy, then perhaps we should stop calling it investigative genetic genealogy or whatever. I don't think it's helpful. I really don't. And I don't care what the name is, but could we just please pick one and stick with it? Because it's already something where we find, and I'm sure you do this every day, explaining to people what it is that you're doing, never mind what we're calling it. It's a little bit like saying we could call milkshakes fraps, which they do up here in New England. I recognize the fact that most people would call it a milkshake, and I'm comfortable with that. From a branding perspective, which actually is one of my areas of expertise, I think we should be calling this forensic genetic genealogy.
Yeah, I'm with you.
End of milkshake discussion.
Yay. It feels like not a day goes by when I don't see something on y'all's social media about there's a case announcement coming up, or here's a case announcement, or possibly on the same day, here's two of them. This field is growing like crazy. How are you guys accommodating this scale that you guys are seeing in people who want to use forensic genetic genealogy for their cases? This is crazy. I remember a couple of years ago when I didn't even understand the term, and now we hear it every single day practically. How are you guys handling this massive growth in scale on your end?
Othram was started with that scale in mind. That was our purpose to begin with. That's what we were hoping to get to. It's incredible to be able to solve a single case, and it should be celebrated. every single day. Every single case should be celebrated. People are waiting for those answers. They need those answers. It's even more necessary to be able to do this at scale. In order to make true change in the world, we'd have to show that this can happen consistently. I think that's what's going to cause people to think twice before they commit these crimes and eventually start to become a deterrent for crime. If you thought you would be caught, if you've left tiny amounts of DNA, if you burned your victims, if you chemically treated your victims, and you can name it, we've probably worked on it, then it would be more likely that you would not commit such crimes in the future, or at least sometimes. Also, being able to do it at scale brings people hope. There are so many families out there that reach out every single day and say, every time you guys put out an announcement, it brings us hope. I hope that it's someone in our family. We celebrate each and every one of them. I had someone write me an email actually yesterday. I'm going to bring it up. And they said that for decades, they were in despair. It felt like it was almost pointless. They continued to investigate what had happened in their family and where their loved one was, and they couldn't figure it out. Now, because of the number of cases that we're announcing on social media, because of all of the solves that they're seeing all over the news, they wake up every morning excited, run to the computer and wait to see what the next case is. And they said they celebrate each and every one, and they just know that one day it's going to be the person they're looking for. And to me, that means the world, because it shows that the technology is bringing hope to people that have felt hopeless for possibly decades and decades right now.
I certainly feel that way as a result of the work that you're doing. For my sister's case, the Colonial Parkway Murders, we're more hopeful now than we've ever been before because of all of these solves and the fact that you're demonstrating that the technology works. That's cause for celebration as well. Carla, I wanted to ask you something. My sense of your joining the team, how far back is that now?
It was in August, I believe, that we decided that I was going to come on board with Othram, but I have worked with Othram as in a collaboration effort with a Mississippi project that we had for a year now. We shared the same mission, the same vision, and it just felt like the right decision for me to make. When I heard what Othram was doing, what they have planned for the future, it's like, how could I not be a part of this company? It was a no-brainer. It was like, yes, I definitely want to come on board.
My sense of it, though, was that you were very skeptical. So if we go back a year ago, August, so 2021, I think you were in the very skeptical, even critical category. Am I wrong?
I had seen Othram in action in Mississippi. They had solved some cases there, and they had a presence there. They were working with the medical examiner's office, and I knew that they had a history already solving cases there, and I wanted to work with them. They were the logical choice since they had a presence there. And I can tell you, as maybe someone who was skeptical, I am a believer now, because they have they have produced profiles on every case that we have in Mississippi, or they are in the works of producing. So I am super impressed. I was super impressed with the work that they were doing to build these profiles. And it made it easy for me to work those cases and produce a lead for those agencies. And multiple cases have been confirmed with DNA. So even if there was skepticism in the beginning, there's zero now, because they are the lab. To me, I've seen them take cases that have failed multiple attempts, and they have no funding left. They have nothing left, and they are being brought to Othram, and they're building a profile. Those cases, leads are being produced because of what is being built. I'm talking cases that had zero hope left. All funding had been used because they had tried and failed multiple attempts.
And let's drill down here a little bit. And the Mittelmans are usually too gracious to bring this up, but I will. Okay. These are cases that have been tested, in some cases, multiple times by other DNA labs and have a record of failure. Testing, and Dr. Mittelman, I'd like you to explain to us how testing can use evidence. Testing done, no results. Testing done, no results. Testing done, no results. And by the way, at this point now, we're literally running out of DNA left to test. Tell us how that works, if you would.
In order for forensic genetic genealogy to be efficient, you have to have build a DNA profile that has enough markers, enough information in it that can actually upload to one of these genealogical databases and have enough matches to get to an answer. If you can't get enough information when building that profile, then you won't be successful in the forensic genetic genealogy part of it. When working these types of DNA cases, you have to work with evidence that is super degraded because you're working from a crime scene, right? You're not working with fresh DNA. Evidence that is contaminated by non-human source of bacteria, evidence that is possibly chemically treated or burned, evidence that is in trace amounts, quantities that are not normal for most medical labs or consumer labs that you see out there. And so there are all these different parameters that you have to think about, and you have to take those low quantities, destroyed quantities of DNA and put them on a sequencer and actually get enough information to be useful at the end. Because if you build a profile and it doesn't have enough information, then you're going to not be able to succeed in actually identifying the person anyway. But you've consumed the evidence, just like Bill said. To me, if you're going to do this type of work, you have to make sure that you're protecting the case. Technology iterates. There are cases in 2022 that Othram has gone back to and solved that we couldn't solve in 2019. We had no idea how to extract information from that piece of evidence in 2019, but we do now. And we've extracted the information and we've been able to identify the victim or the perpetrator. And so technology is always going to iterate. It's always going to get better. Sometimes the best thing to do for a case is to stop and to say, our technology today is not ready for this. Put it on hold. It doesn't mean you don't care about the case. It doesn't mean you won't come back to it. It means that more R&D needs to be done before you actually take that evidence and consume it. Unfortunately, more times than not, that is not what's happening. People are very excited about this new technology. They're very excited about these new methods. And so they are trying to get as much evidence run through these sequencers as possible. What's happening is the evidence is being destroyed. If you're solving a few cases, but you're running 10 times that, or I don't even know, 100 times that in the amount of cases you're running DNA for, and those are not resolving, then I ask the question, are you helping or hurting the field? Because there are family members out there that are going to wait forever to find out what happened to their loved one, and that evidence is going to be gone. I do think that being in this field comes with great responsibility. I think it comes with, if you're going to take a piece of evidence and you're going to use a lab method that consumes that evidence, I hope that you have scientific expertise and background that allows you to make an evidence, even for us, it's our truth sets here at Othram, that allows you to make a predictable decision that you're going to bring value to that case. If you went to a doctor's office today and they treated you for something, that's because that doctor believes that the treatment he's given you is going to help you, or it has a good chance of helping you, or they wouldn't treat you. It should be the same in forensics. Also, if you went to a doctor today and you paid for a medical test, and you came back and they said, Bill, I don't know what your cholesterol is. I did the test and it failed. You would say, hold on a minute.
What am I paying for?
Why did I pay for this? In forensics, it should be the same. There should be an expectation that if you're running one of these tests, you're actually going to be able to bring value to that investigation. Right now, the expectation is that it may work sometimes and it may not. And to me, that's unacceptable.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
You guys have these great shirts that say forensic malpractice on them. Can you explain that term? It sounds pretty much like what you were just talking about there.
Absolutely. A lot of the things that I see happening in the medical field, in the legal field, would be deemed malpractice. I'm going to be really bold and say some things out here today. If you are a person that is the absolute best genealogist out there, you're just incredible, you have this amazing background, and you really understand the portion of this process that actually gets to After the DNA profile is uploaded to one of these databases, you're getting the matches and you're able to figure out exactly who that person is. That's something I can't do. I am not a genealogist. I have never played with my own family tree. And unless the match is like over 2,000 centimorgans, forget it. I'm not even going to be able to follow the process. That's one component of what you need in order to identify someone in these types of investigations. But the first component, and in order to get there, is to be able to get information from that DNA that was left at the crime scene, and to be able to get enough information and clean enough information so that you can do a better job getting matches and actually identifying that person when you get to the genealogy. What I see more often than not is because the end user here is the genealogist. They're the ones that provide the investigative lead back to the investigators. They're the ones that are interfacing. They are now making the decision as to what type of lab method can and can't be used, and what type of lab test should be done, where the evidence should be tested, and what kind of lab. It really is akin to if the nurse in the OR is the person that rolls you out of that emergency, out of that operating room, and they are the ones that are going to take care of you after, but you ask that nurse to dictate exactly how the surgeon is going to perform that surgery. You wouldn't. Or even probably a better example is you have an anesthesiologist in the OR and you have the actual surgeon, and they have to work together in order for that surgery to be successful. They need to be able to do each of their parts in order for you to have success at the end. And they're both equally valuable in that process. But you wouldn't see the anesthesiologist telling the heart surgeon what type of clamp to use during the operation or what to do, how to do it. And you wouldn't see the surgeon telling the anesthesiologist what the dose of the anesthesia should be for the day. That would be unacceptable. In this field, maybe because it is so new, people have decided that they want ownership of the entire process, not logical. And it leads to what we call forensic malpractice, because we can only be experts and bring value to the parts that we are the best at, that we understand. And you can't expect to be able to bring value to the entire investigation. It's part of the reason that we have brought Carla on. Carla is incredible. She told you the story of how she donated to the cases. And yes, it was very early on for DNA Solves days, and no one had made a donation that large yet. And so she got an email to make sure that she didn't accidentally hit an extra zero or something in that donation. And she said no. And she said, no, I really want to help with this initiative. And there's another case I want to fund. And in fact, she funded another case at that amount the next day. And it was one of those things that our relationship with Carla is super organic. In the beginning, Carla hadn't worked so closely with a lab trying to get these profiles for specific cases. We haven't worked so closely with an outside genealogist. And so it was something that we both had to navigate from the very, very beginning. And we both had to figure out how to do it. I knew right away from the very, very first phone call I've had with Carla that our mission was 100% aligned, that both of us only cared about being able to do what's best for each and every case, being able to give as many families answers as possible. And I really believe that when your heart's aligned and your mission's aligned, then it's so easy to work together towards that common goal. Carla didn't need a job and probably didn't even want a job. But when we got to the point where we had to bring genealogy inside Othram and create that sort of last part that's needed for us to be able to scale these investigations to the next level as far as number of solves, et cetera, I couldn't think of anyone better to build a team for us, because she is so aligned with us, because we've done these pilot studies. We've worked on evidence that is extremely difficult. Mississippi bones, oh my goodness, they're some of the toughest bones in the country. We have had every type of DNA evidence come in from Mississippi, and we sat there together, and there were many times we told Carla, this isn't passing QC right now. It has to wait. We have to do more R&D and come back to this one. And she never said, no, I want you to try it or do it faster. And she was always understanding, always willing to wait. There are cases that we had to go back to 2 years later and solve then because we didn't know how to treat them in the very, very beginning. But she was patient through the entire process. And when they solved, she was just as excited as if it was a case solving within the first few weeks, like the ones that can get through the system quite quickly. I really think that people need to take a step back and see what value they can bring to this field. There are so many cases out there. There are 250,000 cold cases in the United States alone. There are 40,000 unidentified remains out there. There is enough work for everyone. And there's a part in this process for everyone that wants to help. We need more advocates. We need more people talking to the government. We need more people figuring out how to get funding for these types of methods. We need more people in every aspect of how to get forensic genetic genealogy to truly clear some of these backlogs and truly change our world, make it a safer and more just place to live. I think that if everyone took a step back and figured out where they fit in that process, rather than try to control the whole process, we would get there so much faster. In every other discipline, and I bring up medicine as my example because that was my background, right? David and I met at Baylor College of Medicine. I understand that's something that we've both been in. In every discipline, people have to work together in order to get a process to work. And Othram, it's amazing to be here because we can do the process from beginning to end, but we're working on the process from the beginning to end and proving this because we had to show that our science actually works and it's different and it's doing something maybe that's different than what was out there before, and how if you're purpose built for this type of method, you're actually going to get a different result. We do it in-house as a function of that's what's necessary right now to showcase the power of this technology and hopefully get the government to fund it even more so that we can have this just become used every single day, a tool in the law enforcement's belt that they can use freely whenever they feel like this tool will help. It's not something that Othram wants to do by themselves forever. Yes, we're paving those roads, but it's something we hope everyone starts to use in the future. It's something we hope to just disseminate to state labs, to other people so that they can do this and we can all clear all of these cases. Our dream is not just Othram is solving all the cases. It's that the world has adopted new technology that is better fit to actually bring answers and is not consuming evidence without being able to bring those answers to everyone.
Carla, I wanted to ask you, you're living now in Dubai. How do you do what you do? You're literally on the other side of the world. How does the information get to you? And then how do you do what you do? And remember, we're civilians here. If you can explain it, that would be really helpful.
So once the kit is uploaded to GEDmatch Pro or Family Tree DNA, then I take that profile and I work the profile as if you would be working your matches to find how you're connected to that match. If you've taken a DNA test, you know that you have a list of relatives. The person who we've uploaded the kit for has a list of relatives as where you fit in your family tree, or maybe perhaps you don't and you're searching for where you fit in the family tree. We are trying to place that person in their genetic tree based on their genetic matches. You often have a paper trail, but the DNA matches will support that paper trail or tell us that we need to go in a different direction. Once you identify those common ancestors of these genetic networks, then you look in the tree and find where the union couple that brings those matches together. So once you start bringing those clusters together, you'll end up with several matches that could be possible leads. So if you can only get to, say, a set of great-grandparents, you may have to do target testing of multiple families in order to generate a lead, in order to narrow down the list of possibilities. But you can get very lucky and those lines come together so beautifully to where you are zooming in on one family. And all you need to do is test a member of that family or contact that family to see if they have a missing person in that family. That's how a case is solved using genetic genealogy. We produce leads. Law enforcement takes that lead. They collect the DNA. They ask the person to submit DNA. Normally, that's successful. And we compare the results. And that's how we identify the unidentified. That's how their names are returned.
You mentioned a paper trail at the beginning of your answer. What's in the paper trail that you sometimes use?
So a paper trail is when you have genetic matches and you have a paper trail census records to each family member. Once you have those paper trails and you can see where your match belongs in their tree, then you can start looking for these other matches that support or refute that couple so you'll know which branch of their family tree to climb. And once you narrow that down, then you look for the descendants and find where that next cluster can come in. And so once you just continue to build and narrow down until you're at a point to where it narrows down the list of possibilities based on genetic matches.
I know this isn't very likely how you work, but whenever you describe this, I keep imagining a massive whiteboard wall with pictures and string and all sorts of stuff. Like, how do you keep all this information straight? It would confuse me beyond belief if I couldn't draw it somewhere. Do you have a massive whiteboard somewhere that you draw on? How do you do this?
Back in 2016, I actually bought a massive whiteboard and used it constantly as I was learning the technique and the methodology. But no, I do not have a massive whiteboard. Everything I do is online. All the records are online. Everything that I look at is public information that you can find publicly in different databases. Even Google searches can turn up some amazing things. Social media is there. So I use every tool imaginable that is public information in order to narrow down the lines.
Kristin, talk to us about this recent track record of 9 for 9 grants. You mentioned this to me the other day. What are the grants and why are you having such success?
There's many, many different grants and contracts out there for FGG right now. And as I told you earlier on, that often what's missing is not the tractable science, not the fact that there's DNA evidence, but the funding is missing in order to be able to solve these cases. Honestly, that's part of the reason that Carla joined as a philanthropist early on DNA Solves and helped us fund some of these cases that were not fundable. We have a lot of people that advocate with DNA Solves right now and help fund these cases, but you can't forever lead these investigations with private funding or with philanthropists. And so it needed to be a bridge to government funding. I worked really hard this year to have this technology acknowledged at the federal level and to open more DNA testing money towards FGG rather than just legacy DNA testing technology. And it's happening. We've had a lot of support, bipartisan support on both sides. And so there's a lot more grant programs that are opening to this type of technology right now. Every time one does, we apply. The funding goes to law enforcement agencies that have the evidence, and then they disseminate it. They do a public bid, and that's what I mean by these grants. They do a public bid, and then everyone that is a vendor for this type of technology applies to this public bid, and then they select one person. Sometimes they multi-award, and they select multiple people to actually do the work for their agencies. Why do I think they're choosing Othram and we have the track record that we have? I think it's our past performance. I think it's very difficult to see a list of solve after solve, to see the distance between one of those announcements and the others getting shorter and shorter. When we started doing this, we could solve a few cases a year. Then we could solve a few cases a month. Now we're announcing a few cases a week. And I believe in the near future, we'll be announcing a few cases a day. Kristen Dilley said earlier on, it's happened a couple of times.
It's crazy.
And maybe even a few an hour. And so that's the goal. But I think it's obvious when you look at someone's application where the list just keeps continuously growing, where biogeographical identity doesn't seem to limit whether or not you can identify that person, where the type of evidence that came in is extremely challenging and you're still able to build one of these profiles. And I think we're getting chosen because of our track record.
Wait, I have to stop you. Civilian talking. You said biographical identity? Is that what you said?
Biogeographical identity.
Okay. Let's break that down. Biogeographical identity. See, I have to think about how to even say it. What does that mean?
Your background. Backgrounds make it a lot more challenging to make an identification based on these databases, right? And in order to be able to make an identification for someone that may be from a difficult biogeographical identity, for example, a Native American, or something that may be less represented in these databases, you need a lot more information, a lot more DNA information so that you can reach those matches and actually be able to figure out where they belong on that family tree, like Carla was talking about. We want this technology to be inclusive of every case. We don't believe that it's justice unless it can be provided to everyone. We've worked really hard to figure out how to work not only with the difficult types of DNA, But even with the difficult cases when it comes to the genealogy, every single part of the process needs to be optimized so that if you do have DNA in a case, you're able to get one of these profiles that will help you get to an investigative lead.
So, Carla, what are some of the groups that are not as well represented in the genealogy field? I assume that there probably are some. Tell us a little bit about that.
The underrepresented populations are African American, you have Hispanic, you have Native American. The majority are European descent. Those are the ones that are well represented, but the ones that are not are the ones that are minority groups, and they're just not very well represented, and they make those cases much more difficult to solve. And then you combine that with like historical records. Maybe the records do not exist for certain populations and they're not publicly available to access. So it does add an extreme layer of difficulty and makes those super challenging. But it doesn't mean they can't be solved. They can, and we are solving those. You can look on the DNA Solve website and you will see all types of ethnicities listed, and those faces, you can see it's just not one ethnicity. There are multiple ethnicities. So it's not that it cannot be done. It just makes them more challenging.
So if we're talking about like the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue, it may be very much harder to solve those using genetic genealogy. Is that about right?
Yes, it would make them harder, but it doesn't mean that they cannot be solved. We just might have to do more target testing. We can get it narrowed down maybe, and we can just do a lot of target testing until we can narrow down those lines further.
So tell us about this new contract you just won with the United States Department of the Interior to help with missing and murdered women. What's going on there?
So it's exactly this project. Now that the technology has expanded and has proven to be effective for these types of cases as well, and we have several solves up on DNA Solves that show that it is effective in those backgrounds as well. We applied, just like everyone else, for this grant that came out through the Department of the Interior with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And yes, we were selected as the sole vendor to try and tackle the issue with missing and murdered Indigenous women. That's a project that means a lot to a lot of people. And I believe it's something that's going to have huge impact. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to be a part of trying to find answers for those families.
Join us again next time as we continue our conversation with Carla Davis and Dr. Kristen Mittelman of Othram. You can follow Othram online through their DNAsolves.com user group, and they're on Facebook, Twitter, and all social media. Next week, we'll be discussing additional developments in the world of Othram and their unique use of forensic genetic genealogy and what they call full genome sequencing, partnering with law enforcement agencies across the country to solve cases involving missing persons, unidentified remains, and unsolved murders and sexual assaults. We hope you'll join us next time on Mind Over Murder. In the meantime, thanks for listening.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristen Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.